Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A very exciting spring practice on the horizon for Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks. Now, what's the biggest difference between this year going into 2025 and where we were 12 months ago? A lot more answers on this South Carolina roster than we had 12 months ago. It starts at the quarterback position, right? 12 months ago, we didn't even know if LaNorris Sellers was going to be quarterback one of this South Carolina offense. Now going into this year's spring practice, LaNorris Sellers is that guy. He's one of the best quarterbacks returning in all of college football. But I think more importantly, he's the guy internally within the South Carolina program. He's going to get more reps with the ones. He's going to have a better command of the offense. He's going to have a better opportunity to get better command of the offense because he ain't really going to be splitting reps in that spring practice session. It's going to be catered to LaNorris Sellers. And I think oftentimes that's really good for a young quarterback's development. And so you have an answer at the quarterback position. That ain't really a big storyline. But throughout the rest of this roster, a lot of competitive depth and a lot of position battles at a lot of different points within the South Carolina roster. And one of the things that I kind of found myself saying before we get into the specific position battles that I want to talk about is it kind of feels like Shane Beamer has this roster where he wants it. Yes, there are still some questions that we're going to talk about, but this feels like the deepest and most talented roster that South Carolina has since Shane Beamer has gotten there. That kind of matters. You can tell from a roster standpoint, this program's going in the right direction. Now, I want to get into some of the more intriguing position battles that you're going to see within the South Carolina program during spring practice. Before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, it's been really fun talking this program. We say it all the time. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas means the absolute world. Y'all know there ain't many programs I love talking about more, and the amount of support means the world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section, whether it's the position battle you are most intrigued with, or you're just straight up calling your shot and saying, hey, player X is going to be a starter for South Carolina in the 2025 season. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. To me personally, there are two position groups on offense that I'm most fascinated with: the wide receiver spot and the offensive line. Now, I want to start with the offensive line, and this is largely the driving factor with my confidence with South Carolina going into 2025. Yes, it starts with LaNorris Sellers. That's why you see South Carolina as a top 10 team, according to a lot of people, going into 2025. To me, the next storyline is this is going to be the best offensive line that we've seen South Carolina have. And I feel pretty dang confident saying that. It's a combination of you brought in some really good veteran pieces in the transfer portal, specifically on the inside of the offensive line, but you also have just a ton of young and budding talent that is kind of working their way up through the program. Now, you look at how this offensive line could shape out. I look at Josiah Thompson, locked to play left tackle. I say it all the time. The last couple of games you saw from that kid in 2024, elite. He looks like an all SEC type of guy going into 2025, which is a stark difference between where South Carolina has been the last couple of years, where Josiah Thompson got thrown out there as a true freshman last year at left tackle, certainly went through some growing pains. Said the same thing for Tree Babalade in the 2023 season. South Carolina has that anchor at left tackle going into 2025. That's really big. The name that I am most intrigued with is Tree Babalade. He could either back up Josiah Thompson at left tackle, but the way I look at it, he's going to be too good in 2025 to keep off the football field. And quite frankly, I think he could be a better guard than tackle. And we've talked about this all the time. I'm really excited to see in spring practice, are we giving him a look on the inside where I think he can start for South Carolina? And then, hey, if something happens to Josiah Thompson this season, knock on wood, nothing happens. But if something happens, you can kick Tree back into left tackle. To me, I'm most intrigued with Tree Babalade, guy like Trevon Baugh, Marquis Anderson, potentially even a guy like Cam Pringle playing on the inside as well. You got some veteran talent and guys like Nick Sharp and Rodney Newsom, who are solid. The ceiling of the South Carolina offensive line, you're talking about best case scenario. To me, a guy like Tree or a guy like Marquis Anderson or a guy like Trevon Baugh find a way to get on the football field and start for South Carolina. And South Carolina loves a guy like Tree because they went out and retained him. I promise you there were a lot of programs that were sniffing around a guy like Tree saying, hey, you ain't going to start at left tackle. Maybe come to our program. South Carolina likes this kid. You get the feeling that they're going to try to put him on the football field at somewhere on the offensive line. And at the very least, it's just, hey, what does our best five look like? To me, Tree Babalene is part of that best five. Now, the other position you're looking at is the wide receiver room. And that was a very contested conversation that we had during that winter transfer portal window, where I think we assumed South Carolina was going to get aggressive in the transfer portal, putting some pieces around LaNorris Sellers, and they really weren't all that aggressive. I think that's for two different reasons. One, I would guess there's a lot of confidence that Nick Harbor can be that true wide receiver one for South Carolina in 2025. And look, we saw him turn the corner late in 2024. And from what I've read, he's not going to participate in track this year. So it's full go football, which for a guy like Nick Harbor, when's the last time that he's been full football for 12 months of a year? Probably never in his life because he always ran track in the offseason. What does that mean for his development as a wide receiver? It should fire up a lot of South Carolina fans. There's a very real shot that Nick Harbor turns into one of the most dangerous wide receivers that you see in the SEC. Jared Brown, kind of a known commodity. Bennett's a guy that you really like going into year two. I think the biggest conversation is, what do some of these true freshmen look like? Now, Donovan Murph is not going to come in until the summer. He's probably my favorite. Look, Malik Clark, Brian Rowe, Lex Cyrus, I believe all three, definitely Malik Clark and Lex Cyrus, are sub 10.7 in the 100-meter dash. I mean, those guys can absolutely burn. And I think that was maybe a reason why South Carolina wasn't all that aggressive with wide receivers in the portals. Yeah, we have confidence in Nick Harbor. We also got a lot of confidence in the freshman wide receivers that we are bringing in. It's, for me, for my money, the most talented crop of wide receivers that South Carolina has signed under Shane Beamer. That's the biggest storyline. What do these freshman wide receivers look like? And then coming out of spring, all right, maybe you want to go add one more wide receiver. You can. But you're giving these young cats a shot to kind of show what they can do going into 2025. What's the offensive line rotation look like? What do the young cats look like in this wide receiver room? What's the development of Nick Harbor? Are some of the position battles and storylines that you're looking at the most? Going to the defensive side of the football, if you're talking about, position battles that you're looking at, it's very obvious where we're going to go. I actually want to start with a maybe not so obvious conversation, and that is who are going to be the edge rushers. We know Dylan Stewart's going to be one of them. That ain't no secret. What's the edge rusher on the other side of Dylan Stewart? And what's the depth of this edge rusher room going to look like? It's so fun because there's so much talent in this room, right? Brian Thomas is probably the guy that you would pencil in to start opposite Dylan Stewart right now. Jaylen Brown, going into year two, a transfer from Missouri. Uber talented kid. That was a top 100 prospect because of the traits he possesses. What about Desmond Yu? And this is another really, really gifted, talented kid that's going into year three. Wendell Gregory making the transition to off-ball linebacker. It sounds like to be an edge rusher. Jaylen Brown, Desmond Yu, Wendell Gregory. That's a ton of talent. Do any of them kind of break out and really emerge as a dominant edge rusher opposite Dylan Stewart? Because if you look at South Carolina and say, all right, how do they kind of continue their defensive dominance that we saw in 2024, it really does start with the pass rush. Now, on the inside, that's probably the biggest storyline. The two players that I'm looking at the most, Xavier Hardy and Gabriel Brown-Ladindi. For Brown-Ladindi, it's look, we know this kid's a 5-star. We know he has the ability to be very, very, very good. Has struggled with injuries, has struggled with consistency at time. If you're a South Carolina fan, in my opinion, you're rooting for Brown-Ladindi to win one of those spots because that tells you he might kind of be starting to become that 5-star prospect that we knew he was coming out of high school. And then Xavier Hardy's another guy that you feel like you're going to need to have play significant snaps, and a guy that probably you're monitoring what he looks like, a little bit small for an interior defensive lineman, but apparently he's up to 295. If Gabriel Brown-Ladindi and Xavier Hardy win those 2 starting spots on the inside, it, to me, makes me feel better about the depth on the inside of the defensive line. And then the last conversation you're having is the off-ball linebacker spot. I think a name to probably, and look, the talent is undeniable, right? Fred Johnson, Justin Okoronkwo, both guys going into year 2. Justin obviously transferring in from Alabama. That's talent. I mean, that's some of the more, from a physical trait standpoint, some of the more gifted off-ball linebackers that you'll see in the conference. Now, the play on the field is kind of an unknown, right? You haven't seen Fred Johnson or Justin play significant football in the SEC, but you know they're talented enough to do so. Donovan Darden is another guy, and it might be a slower burn from him because he was a guy that was an edge rusher at the high school ranks and now is going to move to the off-ball linebacker spot. 6'4", 230, extremely gifted kid. Can he become a factor in that off-ball linebacker room? If you can answer those 2 questions, right? If you can answer the interior defensive line and the off-ball linebacker position, this South Carolina defense is going to be really good in 2025. But those are the 2 positions that, if you're reading the spring practice notes, those are the 2 positions you're scrolling right down to and saying, all right, what are we looking at those 2 spots? Because if it kind of figures itself out in spring practice, there ain't many holes in the South Carolina defense, and there's some real top-end talent as well. It's going to be a really fun spring practice. And again, there are more answers on this roster going into this spring practice than there were last year. I mean, last year was kind of just, you didn't really know what you were going to get. You didn't really know what you were going to get going into 2024. It was much better than we expected. Now in 2025, it's like, all right, now we can build. Now we know our guys. We know the answers that we have. Now it's just about getting better and becoming a college football playoff team. That's what excites me the most. And it just feels like Shane Beamer finally, for the first time since maybe he's been there, has the talent and depth necessary to really put it all together. So we'll see how the spring practice window looks for South Carolina. We're going to talk a lot about some of the notes that we hear over the next couple of days and weeks. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.